Can you hear me? Hello?
Peter.
Hi.
To test it? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Can you test to make sure? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, we can barely hear you though. You might want to.
How about now? Is that better? How about now? Do you want me to join from my phone?
You have a conversation with Peter?
I do.
Can you ask him if he would prefer a resident speak at the beginning under just communications, or if he will allow them to speak in response to my presentation? It's study session typically.
Sure.
Peter, it's Amy. I have a resident who would like to speak regarding the presentation this evening, and it is the chair's discretion to allow them to speak. Otherwise, you'll have to speak at communications up front. Are you okay with allowing a resident to speak?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, Dorothy, you'll follow me.
So that's a problem. So I can't hear him.
Okay, let me call my phone then.
Oh, he's going to try to call. He's using his phone.
One second. Let me call from my phone.
Okay.
Is this better? Is this better?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. It's my phone, so it's kind of shaky. But yeah, to answer your prior question, absolutely. Yes. Can you hear me?
Hey, Peter, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Fantastic. So Peter, we're ready to rock. You want to call this thing to order?
absolutely. Perfect. The time now is 6:07 Gilbert time. I'm calling the meeting to order for the July 21st Redevelopment Commission meeting. Staff, please take roll call.
Chair Peter Shaka,
Present.
Commissioner Bo Bigelow, Commissioner Casey Kindle,
Present.
Commissioner Cassandra Meehan,
Present.
and do we need to swear in TJ before we can say that he's present at the meeting? Is that how that works? Great. So, Chairman Peter Shaka, we have a quorum.
That's great. So I had a question before the meeting started, but at this time, the members of the public may comment on matters not on the agenda. The commission's response is limited to responding to criticism, asking the staff to review a matter commented upon, or asking that a matter be put on a future agenda. Is there anyone here or in the room there that would like to address the commissioners at this time?
Chair Shaka, we do have someone who would like to address door leases here in the room.
Absolutely. Please. Please state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Dorlease Liddell would like to speak after my presentation, and if you would be amenable to that, we would shift her toward the end.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. And Mary Ellen Fresquez may also want to speak.
Okay. Are there any other comments from the public, other people? If not, I'll move forward to administrative items.
You can move forward.
Great. So now we move to administrative item number 1, and that is to consider the approval of minutes for the regular meeting held on April 21st, 2021. Are there any edits the commission wishes to make, or do I have a motion for the Redevelopment Commission meeting minutes for April 21st, 2021? Is there anybody that would like to make a motion for approval?
I'd like to make a motion for approval.
Could you state your name? Because I can't connect the voice yet. Sorry.
Sure. Casey Kendall. Motions to approve.
Perfect. And do we have a second to Commissioner Kendall's motion?
Cassandra Meehan, I second the motion to approve.
Perfect. So with that, we have not sworn in Commissioner yet, TJ Clausen. And we do have a quorum. So I guess all in favor of approving the minutes, I'm going to do a roll call vote. So not necessarily, I think we already have a motion for approval, but Commissioner Kendall, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Meehan, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I too, Bo Bigelow, Commissioner Bigelow, are you on the phone? I do not hear him. I also vote for yes for approval. So are there any nays? Hearing none, the approval moves forward. Now going on to the administrative item number 2, we have to approve the minutes of the Redevelopment Commission retreat held on May 25th, 2021. Are there any edits that the commission wants to make? Hearing none, I'm looking also for an approval for the Redevelopment Commission retreat minutes for May 25th, 2021.
Cassandra Meehan, I motion to approve the minutes from May 25th, 2021.
Perfect. And do we have a second?
Casey Kendall, I second.
Perfect. Kind of redundant, but commissioners, do you vote yes or no? Yes for approval of the retreat minutes. Commissioner Kendall, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Meehan, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I myself, Chairman Shaka, also vote yes. Are there any nays or no? Hearing none, that also moves forward with approval. So with that, thank you guys. Kind of doing this for my first time remotely. for this kind of meeting, so appreciate your patience. So with that, we're going to go on to the oaths of office. So this is agenda item number 3. Mr. Dan Henderson will administer the oath of office for the Redevelopment Commissioner member TJ Clausen. Usually, I'll leave this up to Mr. Henderson, but we like to get a little background if we have time, or a little, brief intro if you'd like to do so. But now I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you. TJ, stand up and welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm gonna state a couple of things here and just have you repeat after me.
Okay.
I state your name,
I, Theodore Clausen,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona
and the Constitution and laws in the state of Arizona
and the ordinances of the town of Gilbert, Maricopa County, Arizona.
and the ordinances of the town of Gilbert, Maricopa County, Arizona.
I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and defend them against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
and defend them against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
And that I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties
And I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties
of the office of the Town of Gilbert Redevelopment Commission member
of the office of the town of Gilbert Redevelopment Commission member
in Gilbert, Arizona,
in Gilbert, Arizona,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Welcome.
Thank you, Dan.
You bet.
Thank you, Dan Henderson, and welcome, Commissioner Clausen. I look forward to working with you. If you'd like to take just a brief moment to say your background, basically your passion for serving, if you just can briefly state that, would be great. Can you hear me?
Sorry about that. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Good, yeah.
Perfect. Didn't know the mic had to be turned on. So yeah, TJ Clausen. So my family and I are residents of the town of Gilbert and have been so for about 7 years. I've got 4 beautiful children, lovely wife. All of my kids go to school here in Gilbert. And I've been in commercial real estate for 15 years, largely involved in retail and office leasing and sales. And I've had a lot of involvement in the Heritage District and some of the businesses that you see down there, such as like Oso Brewery, and bringing them down to Gilbert. I was the one that convinced them to make that move down to Gilbert. And I'm excited to work with all of you and continue the groundwork that you guys have laid. You've done a great job.
Awesome. Thank you. Exciting stuff. Thank you so much. So with that, we'll move forward to the welcome aboard. With that, we're moving on to the study session. We look forward to the staff's discussion regarding item Z20-05. For the benefit of the new commissioner, study session items are meant to be an opportunity for commissioners to ask questions and provide feedback. Please state your name when asking the question, and no motions are made during study session. Staff, the floor is yours to prevent the LDC refresh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing here. It's going to take me a second to get the screen up and running. Thinking. Needs to think faster. And it's doing 1 second. Not what I was supposed to share. Sorry. Click full screen mode and we are ready to go. All right. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Redevelopment Commission. I'm Amy Timms. I'm a principal planner with the town of Gilbert, and I am here this evening to present the Land Development Code refresh, which has recently been released for a 21-day public review and comment. So it's a 30-month long process, and I know that sounds really long, but it is an in-house process. It was staff working with the town council subcommittee. The town council, Mayor Jen Daniels at the time, initiated the refresh and assigned Bridget Peterson, Eddie Cook, and Jordan Ray as council members to the committee. And we met bi-weekly for over a year and a half. And we went page by page by page and discussed elements of the code. And some of that information came from a spreadsheet we kept over the years. We called it our parking lot, which were topics that we knew needed to get picked up, but they were little minutia items and never seemed to make it to the next land development code update. You know, there was always like a group of 8 or a group of 7 that would go through, and these little ones never made it tagged on. And we finally said, we're so happy the mayor said, let's just take care of all these things. Let's clean it up, let's refresh it, and let's get it started. So we held the bi-weekly meetings. They were public meetings, and the clerk took minutes at the meetings. They were published. So there was also outside legal review and in-house legal review of the documents. And we added new graphics, and the graphics were put on hold during COVID because the monies were held. And so we couldn't move forward with the outside legal review or the graphics last year until they were released in December. So that is why it's 30 months. So I feel I just needed to say that. We also, in that spreadsheet, it was running comments from applicants, PAD requests. It was staff comments about things in the code that maybe didn't meet up in the middle the way they should have, and resident comments over the years. And then also requests for zoning interpretation and zoning verifications. A lot of items would come up when a mortgage company would ask for verification of the zoning, and they'd be like, well, why didn't they do this? And we're like, well, it's kind of a policy. Well, we needed to put that policy in writing. It had been a 20-year policy, but enough's enough. So we also went and we reviewed Arizona state law, changes there, federal law, and any other applicable design guidelines or town guidelines or ordinances that would apply. A lot of engineering standards were not in harmony with the land development code. So in a lot of cases, we took those sections out and just referred to the engineering guidelines instead of trying to make sure every time they changed, we changed. That would get really kind of complicated. And they also had some variance processes that allowed for a lot more flexibility than the land development code allows for under state law. We also looked at American Planning Association best practices. A few things we didn't touch, and I just want to clarify those up front. The off-street parking table, we have money in this year's fiscal budget to have a consultant come in and review our whole parking section. We did make some changes to the overall section, but the parking table we didn't touch. We really felt those ratios needed to be updated to autonomous vehicles, to alternative fuel vehicles, to Uber and Lyft, and all the different facets of life we have today that they didn't anticipate when this was written. We also would like to eventually have a consultant come in and review the wireless facilities and over-air devices because they're ever changing and we fall under federal law. And so federal law trumps whatever we write. So there's some discussion of how much do we really need in there when federal law keeps making the rules for us. So that is something we feel a consultant would be very helpful on. Animals, common area ownership and maintenance and enforcement is very closely tied to the municipal code. All 3 of those are. And until the municipal code is updated, we felt we couldn't really update the land development code because there were just too many overlaps, or the municipal code had cross references that weren't aligned. And until those were ironed out, we couldn't properly reflect the intent. With that being said, we reorganized the whole code. We brought sections to the front that belonged in the front. We moved other sections to applicable areas where it made sense, where if someone was logically looking for something, that's where they would think to go. But also with that, we added links, hot links, so that the blue hot links in the document should take you to the next step. What is my next step? What is my next question? We try to anticipate if I was building a garage on my property, what would I need to know? And then we tried to think for them because a lot of residents, a lot of business owners don't know what questions to ask until they haven't asked them and then found out they should have asked them. And that's what we wanted to avoid. So we put sign code and walls and fences in a table format to try to simplify it so that if I'm a business owner and I want to know what my sign rights are and I'm in a commercial district, I follow it, I find it, and I'm like, okay, I know what my rights are. And it's pretty simple. And then we added brand new graphics, as I mentioned, and consistent town branding. So I'm not going to read you my PowerPoint. There's lots of bullet points, but I tried to really focus, especially with the orange highlighted ones, on what I thought the Redevelopment Commission and residents in downtown and business owners in downtown would be most interested in. One of the things I wanted to point out is we did break out accessory structures into their own table on each page, which I've got an example here. And so you have the primary standards by which in this case, regional commercial would be developed by for the principal structure. And then you have the rules for the accessory structure. And we added some rules regarding parking structures and parking garages and parking canopies in commercial and industrial. And so things that weren't really addressed before are now addressed. Then one of the other key modifications I will point out, and this is the standard building step back, but I'm going to address it in the Heritage Village a little bit later in the presentation, is that we did shift around how the building step back is done. And a building step back is not a setback. A setback takes the dimension from your boundary inward to create the buildable envelope. Whereas a step back talks about more of how you reduce massing or push massing back so that air, light, and massing doesn't overwhelm what is adjacent. And most of the times the step back is in reference to either being next door to a residential use, in most cases, single family. In this case, we did give a little more latitude overall within the general community to measure from the private property line instead of the center of the road. The way it's written today is step backs are measured from where the zoning changes. So our zoning always changes in the middle of the road, or if they're back-to-back properties at the property line, where now it takes it to the private property line instead of the middle of the road. And I did put in all the pages of the land use regulation tables, but what I really wanted to focus on were when you see a line where it's yellow all the way across, that means it's a new use. When you see bits and pieces in yellow, that means that block was changed. So in this case, dormitory is a brand new use. And yes, we now have a dormitory here in Gilbert. And so that is what made us realize we really didn't need to add this because University of North Dakota has a dormitory out on the east side. They have a flight school over at Polytech. So handy to have there. We also added outpatient surgery centers. We found that they're not the same animal, so to speak, as an urgent care or a hospital or even a clinic. So we felt they needed their own land use. Parking structures can now be a standalone. It can be private or public. So they're added in. Piercing studio is highlighted because it used to say tattoo and piercing studio, and then it had distancing regulations. Under law now, under state law, tattoo is considered a freedom of speech and an art form and cannot be regulated as such. So it had to come out of there because it's actually illegal under state law now to regulate it as such. Entertainment and recreation outdoor, we turned it to active and passive. So active being obviously a use that sports activities, gaming activities, anything that makes noise and is somewhat intrusive to the surrounding neighborhood. And passive is picnicking and hiking and walking and bike trails. More, you're just sitting and having a good time instead of a situation where it's a loud activity. Then we also have shooting range. We realized that shooting ranges, we do have a shooting range here in town. And when that was going through, we realized it didn't really fit in under any of the uses for whatever reason it may be. So we added it as a separate land use. Animal daycare was added because doggy daycare is very popular nowadays, and it is not kenneling. The definition for kenneling is not the same as a doggy daycare. Health resort. The reason that was added in is not because we have a resort with a health resort attached, but it's because it was often confused with day spa, and we wanted to break them apart because a day spa and allowances within a day spa are not the same as what we would expect with a health resort. And then when you see a line, if you can see these two lines are just a line going across and they have no boxes, that means something was removed. And I'll tell you right now what they are. One is quarrying and mining. We do not think we're going to get a quarry or a mine here in town. So we felt safe in removing that. And the other had to do with a duplicate heading for waste and salvage, which was not necessary. And once we cross-referenced the terms and glossary definitions, we realized it was not necessary. And then we did add community garden because we had a request for several of those now. The limitations were all rearranged and reworded based on how things were amended. And then that moves us on to single family. One of the things I wanted to note and trying to encourage redevelopment within the town of Gilbert, we created an additional 10% lot coverage for homes that have been established for greater than 20 years to encourage reinvestment. Because to be quite honest, the builders tend to max out their lot coverage to the nth degree. And then a homeowner who wants to add a shade structure or extend their patio is now out of space. But it's an older home. We would like them to reinvest. This is a way to maybe help them out. We're going to see how it goes and see if there's any other thoughts we have with how we can possibly add to the code in the future to help that out too, to keep older neighborhoods lively and moving along. In the Heritage District, SF6 and SF7 are still 36 feet, but they're limited to 2-story now instead of 3-story. And I didn't move. That was in keeping with the neighborhoods that exist, that 3 stories out of character for Lacey Tract or Greenhaw, and we felt that the 2-story was more in keeping. Then moving on to floor area ratios in the Heritage Village Center. The floor area ratio that is in code today is a suburban ratio. It is nowhere, shape, or form an urban ratio. We just didn't feel it was needed. We get the developments, we're getting down there, trying to push for more intensity and more height can be somewhat problematic in some cases, and most developers already have in mind what they want to move forward with. And so it was an additional regulation that didn't need to be there. In employment, we ended up, really employment's not as predominant in downtown with landscaping for LI, so I'm going to skip that and move on to other Heritage Village allowances. So we talked about setting the story height limitation for the 2 residential. Well, we also set story limitations. The heights didn't change on those, but the story limitations were put in to be consistent with the rest of the town. And we also in SF6 in the Heritage zoning, which there's a PAD overlay, a planned area development overlay for residential in the downtown specifically. And it has its own special section of code. We added in SF6, which is Lacey Tract, that there's a minimum and maximum lot size. Right now, the minimum lot size is 3,000 square feet. We added that the maximum lot size would be 6,999. And we did that so that the neighborhoods, once again, stay consistent with what they were approved with, that they don't start to split up too small or start to do McMansions by adding 5 lots together, and now there's 1 large lot that's been combined. So it goes both ways. We're trying to keep consistency with the neighborhood vernacular. In MFL, which is multifamily low, and that's predominantly on the east side of Gilbert Road, behind, if you picture Whiskey Row. The common area and open space requirement was reduced from 40% to 35%. It may still be a little high for some developments, but it's more in keeping with reducing for an urban form. MF step back, I'm going to show you the graphic for, but then I also mentioned that in MFM, the open space was reduced from 40% to 25%, which is more in keeping with an urban environment percentage that you would more likely see. Still maybe a little on the high side for most urban areas, but there's streetscape, there's amenities, there's other things that do need to occur. And if that becomes an issue, they can go through a planned area development overlay, zoning, rezoning, and amend that if they would need to. I will also add that in for required private open space, a solid roof is required over that private open space. I will admit one of our residents, Dorleys, found an error on one of our exhibits for the vertical overlay, and I'm going on the record. There is no overlay area 6. The Heritage District is not a vertical overlay. This was just an erroneous mistake, and it will be corrected. Now getting into the step backs. The step backs were amended a little bit for the Heritage District, and they are in keeping with the way the design guidelines were written and adopted. So if you picture Ash Street, and on one side of Ash Street, there's single family homes, most of them, I'd say almost all of them are 1 story. And on the other side of Ash Street, there's Heritage Village zoning, HVC zoning. And in that Heritage Village zoning could be 4 stories, 55 feet by right. And the way the ratio is written today, it's at the 3rd floor, you have to have a 10-foot step back and then you can move on. And that's still creating a fairly imposing building adjacent or across the street from residential. So what was discussed and what we have in the document is from the setback line, the property line of where it's a 0 front setback line for that zoning district. You would do a 1-to-1 ratio, which is pretty standard across the town, and step back from the 3rd floor. And that's to let light, air, and massing in, and to not have a looming building facing that lower density residential. But what the current code has is for the step back of the 10-foot, it's across all the HVC zoning everywhere in the Heritage District. But we've said now, it's only if you're adjacent to single family residential or on the boundary of the district. So if you're on the boundary of the district, in most cases, let's say you're over off of Palm and you're adjacent to the residential neighborhood to the east, which is SF7 zoning, and you want to do multifamily. Well, there's already a setback that says if you're multifamily adjacent to single family residential, you have to set back 15, 20 feet from the property line. So you've already got that setback. And now the idea is the massing needs to sort of be pushed back a little. So instead of measuring from the face of the building, in this case, you measure from the property line across the setback. And then once you're at the 3rd floor or the 4th floor, you start to do the 1-on-1. In this case, the setback was big enough that it didn't affect the 3rd floor, but it did affect the 4th floor. And so the 4th floor had to push back. So it depends on what you're next to and how tall you want to be. So we thought that gave latitude to both sides. And also I'll point out that I did catch that the text was not amended to match the graphics, and it will be picked up. Moving on, we gave some flexibility to schools and places of worship for temporary structures, and we already talked about tattoo parlors. The one other large item I'd like to mention is currently in the code. Between SF43 and SF6, all the residential zoning districts, secondary dwellings are allowed by an administrative use permit, and guest quarters are allowed by right. What we were finding is the guest quarters were being rented out, which guest quarters may not be rented out. And we were finding that the secondary dwellings, a lot of people didn't want to go through the administrative permit. So they were building guest quarters and then turning them, not legally, but into leasable, in their mind, leasable quarters and circumventing the system. So we took a look across the country and we said, how do other cities deal with these accessory dwelling units? Are there size limitations? What processes are required? What parking is required? Are full kitchens allowed? So we took a broad look across. We found that some cities actually only allow teeny weeny studio apartments, basically. And we found others didn't put any limitations on it the way we did. We've had a couple situations in town where there was a 5,000 square foot house on the property, or even a 4,000 in another situation, and their secondary dwelling was bigger than the primary structure. And then they added a guest quarter that was as big as the primary structure. And so what do you get? You get a VRBO that's renting out 3 individual structures, one of them illegally, and marketing them. And now you've got parties happening at each of these structures on a weekly basis, and it was becoming an issue in some neighborhoods. So we said, okay, we also had sat through a number of different best practice presentations through the APA, American Planning Association, on this subject, where whole neighborhoods were being taken down and this was being done. And so we said, okay, how can we meet in the middle? And we said, let's create an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit. You get one by right on your property. If you're SF6 through SF43, you can rent it. You can have a kitchen, but it can only be 1/2 the square footage of your livable area of your primary dwelling. So if your primary dwelling, not counting the garage or porches or patios, your primary dwelling livable is, let's say 5,000 square feet for a nice round number, then I could have a secondary dwelling of 25,000 or 2,500 square feet. So it's still allowing a decent size, and it's still being flexible. You still have to be in the building envelope. You still have to look like the primary structure, so you have to blend in. We get a lot of questions about, can I put a modular in my backyard and call it good? Or can I put a tiny home in my backyard and call it good? Can I use an RV? No. But we think this will be a happy medium and put some regulations on how large they can be, because we had a couple lots that were basically, instead of being a single family lot, we're turning into a triplex lot, which is not what that neighborhood signed up for. It's not what the neighbor signed up for. It's not what rest of the neighborhood signed up for either. And it increases parking and traffic and all the other things that go with that. We did put the wall and fence, all the walls and fences into a table. We found some gray areas when we did that where it wasn't addressed. We did fill those in. And we allowed for the wall and fence modification now to be a process that can be used not just on the perimeter fence, but on any wall or fence within the property. And that would go to Planning Commission for approval. Let's see, we did add some provisions for infill development and not having to have setbacks on master plan site plans. We did add some allowances for additional signage on 2 and 3 story and up buildings. All the signs, as I said, got put in tables. And where are we now? On the 28th, we end the public review and comment process. I encourage people, please give me comments. And there is a dedicated email. I check it every day with an outside email to make sure it works, because the first day we had a little problem with it, and I apologize for that. But it is LDC feedback at gilbertaz.gov. So LDC feedback at gilbertaz.gov. And you can send those in, and we document all the different comments that come in. We also monitor social media. We have been putting blasts out on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those. And then we monitor them for what the comments are regarding the LDC. Most of the comments to date were more general plan oriented or land use zoning map oriented. We are not amending the zoning map. We are not amending the general plan, but we're still documenting the comments received. So with that, there is the email address in case I botched it. But, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. It is a hefty document, and I thank you for taking the time to do this as light reading on the weekends. I think it's around 480 pages. But if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you'll recall, we have 2 residents who would like to speak and at the chairman's purview.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Great presentation. So with that, I'll go to the other commissioners if there's any questions. I have a couple questions myself, but I'll go to the other commissioners first if there's any questions. And obviously, Amy, this is a fluid process. If we come forward to the next day or week, or we're going to have, we can also email the same email, but we can also pick up the phone and call you. Is there a preference from the commissioners if we have follow-up questions to you, how we communicate with staff?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. If you feel there's a discussion and you're not maybe understanding something, then I'm happy to have a discussion with you. Give me a call and we can talk through it. I will still document it as a comment or a question received, and it will still be noted in the upcoming Planning Commission staff report and future staff reports. If you feel you just have a static question or a static comment, like I misspelled a word or something, just go ahead and shoot it to the email.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yep. So with that, are there any other questions that the commissioners have at this time? Hearing none, I had just a couple brief ones on the parking. Ms. Thames, you've talked about Lyft and Uber, but also I'm sure there's been considerations about food to go, or either by customers picking up their food to go, post during pandemic. That's been a huge hit for businesses and their survival, but also just Grubhub and Uber Eats. And so has that been considered as far as the parking, as that you guys considered that as well?
Mr. Chairman, that will be in our parking update that we'll have a consultant helping us out with. We started looking at some of the drive-through stacking requirements, and because we also have some drive-through restaurants that are coming through with not only double drive-through lanes, but now they have Uber stacking lanes with another drive-through on the other side. So it's one side is for ordering and picking up, and another side is for pre-ordering and picking up. And it's starting to get really complicated. And then if they back up, now they're backing up in front of this required parking. So now the required parking, now people are parking off site to come on site because there's cars in front of them and they can't get in and out. And we just really feel that this is something we want a consultant to help us with. And whether some of the results of COVID are going to be long-term, we're kind of still waiting to see how far is this going to extend. Is this just the new normal and everybody's going to do pick up, take out, and from now on, we've already adapted to some of the grocery store pickups and allowing them to turn some of their parking spaces into pickups. But we want all of that addressed in code and talked about and thoroughly vetted. So it was discussed, but it was not amended. If I were to point to one major thing that changed, or two major things that changed in the parking section, I will point out that we did apply standards to garage sizes. And it is 10 by 20 for a standard stall. And because we were finding that builders were putting the water heater in it, they were putting storage in it, and pretty soon the only thing you could fit in the garage was a smart car. So we did put some requirements for that. And we did check with the National Garage Association, and we did look at other codes around the country. So that was double checked. And then I'll also say we did allow for some temporary and off-site parking in certain zoning districts to allow for overflow for special events and things like that. So thank you for that question.
Would the garage size minimums include, say, recycle or trash containers as well?
The garage size should be free and clear. Now, obviously, if you have a home where the builder decided that that was where the containers were going to go, you're grandfathered, it exists. We're not going to come knocking on your door and say, your garage is substandard. But in new construction, it should be free and clear. And if you want the garage, if you want the recycle and garbage stored in your garage, just as if you have storage shelves, there should be some additional space allotted for that.
Perfect, thanks. Question, I was just thinking about the, not the setbacks, but your step backs. Is there any need to consider some kind of landscape buffering? It's kind of a big question, but is landscape buffering important in step backs?
It is important in step backs when you're adjacent for, let's take, for example, a light industrial adjacent to a residential use. The requirements for landscape currently is if you're adjacent to a residential use and you're a commercial or employment use, you have to do non-deciduous trees, X amount on center to create a virtual screen. And those trees have to be approved by our landscape reviewer as non-deciduous or semi-deciduous. There's only certain species who will accept as semi-deciduous. The idea is to keep an evergreen leaf tree at a certain height along that. And we usually encourage a mixing of box sizes so that some of the trees will grow up faster and not to create too hard of a burden on the developer, but mixing them in at least gets some of the trees up faster to the height that we're looking for, and then the others follow. And then also some people don't realize that trees do have lifespans. So depending on the tree, some trees go for hundreds of years, other trees do not. And especially in an arid climate where maybe they're not getting watered properly on a regular basis, they will time out. So by planting different size trees, those trees are at different life points in their lifespan. And so that allows, as one tree dies off, another tree can be planted without the whole screening of trees dying at the same time. So
thank you. I appreciate it. The last question I had was going to your chart on uses and how some things the boxes are blank because they're not, there's not going to be the need. It's not a catch-all, but other downtowns don't allow say medical ground floor or too much office ground floor or gun sales. You talked about, gun range, but gun sales or adult stores for books or whatever. So I didn't know if there, as far as the uses, if there's been, any other, I guess, brainstorming on things that, as you see downtowns go through these cycles, what's good long term? Do we need to have some additional, I guess, uses talked about, prohibited, et cetera?
Well, let's talk about uses for a second, and then let's talk about first floor. We have a lot of requests for like banquet facilities on the roof, and we've said that we don't think that's a good idea. And so that was not modified in here. However, a bar or restaurant could be on the roof, and some people have issue with that, and I understand. So that is one modification that is, well, it's not really a modification, it exists, you can do it. But then we also have said that on the first floor, especially if there's loft living above, if you have housing above, you have to have commercial or a non-residential use on the first floor, and that does not include parking. It only includes the leasing office. It doesn't include your gym. It doesn't include all the other accoutrement of the multifamily that's on the upper floors. There is the transparency from the first floor, and so that helps to regulate what goes down there because we want windows, we want doors, we want, where you're walking by and there's a vibrant streetscape and you can see activity going on. As far as limiting the uses, other than limiting it because of loft above, we tend to not limit uses that are within categories within the town. If it's allowed within, let's just go with Heritage Village Center, it's allowed. If it's allowed with a use permit, in some cases, you can't have multifamily on the first floor, like in Gateway Village Center, unless there's a use permit. Well, we've kind of started moving away from some of the use permits because the long and short of it is once you grant a use permit, it is nigh to impossible to revoke a use permit because people have spent a lot of money on whatever it is that use permit granted, and now you're going to take it back. How do you do that? So we really tried to go through, and a lot of the changes in here you see are yellow. It's either a lot of the use permits either went to P for permitted, or we said it's just not appropriate. So that was this section right here. These yellow boxes took a huge amount of time to go through. I'd say it took at least a month to 2 months to go through this chart and decide with the amount of conversation and research of what needed to get amended. So we typically don't limit specific uses except if they're the non-traditional, such as the pawn shops, the piercing, and those kind of different activities. Other than that, we've stayed out of limiting specific uses that are normal, standard. I don't want to say normal. I don't want anyone to take that wrong. Standard uses that are not listed as non-traditional. Not my opinion on any of that.
Perfect. And just a reminder to the commissioners, I mean, we serve on the redevelopment commission more for, the looks and aesthetics and the feel and the windows and the step backs, all that. And so, planning and zoning is uses and city council is uses. I just thought, it was a slide presented and it's nice to know and maybe as our job in the future, how we may look at it, the look and feel of that if it comes forward to us, depending what the use is. But so it's kind of more of a general question. So I just want to, thank you and remind the other commissioners, like that's not really our job, but it is always nice to know what's going in and what the purpose is, if it's an ice cream shop or if it's a tattoo parlor. And so, which we have some great ones online or in the town now. So with that, are there any other questions from commissioners?
I have a question.
So, yes.
Casey Kendall.
Perfect.
What's the definition of a temporary structure? And then how long is temporary?
That depends on the structure. And so if we're talking, let's say a pod and you're a commercial or a light industrial user, if you're in light industrial, you can actually apply to have a pod be permanent. And that's a master plan for that has to be approved, showing where you're going to keep your pods and how you're going to use them. If you're a retail use in a regional commercial zoning, and at Christmas, you've got a lot of overflow product and you need to have some outdoor storage, you have 90 days, it's either 60 or 90 days off the top of my head. I'm not going to be 100%, but there's a limited time frame in which you can do that, which basically covers a holiday season. So you start around Halloween and it takes you through New Year's and you got to get it off of there. And that can be approved. And then there's the modulars that I talked about for churches and such. Those have a time frame that's tied to the permit for construction. And we did allow a little bit of latitude with them getting those modulars in earlier because they need time for setup. As far as other temporary, some are tied to special events, and those are under the special event permit. Other than that, unless it's specifically spoken to in the code as a temporary use or a temporary structure, there's no such thing. So really the code speaks to those, and you need to find where it's spoken to in the code to be permitted to have that. So it really does vary based on what you're asking for, and we'd have to find that specific portion of the code. Maybe not as detailed an answer as you'd like, but probably the best I can do without a specific example and some research time to look it up.
No, that's fine. And I guess to build on that, then there would be a permitting process even for a temporary structure.
Depends on the use, depends on the structure.
Okay.
Depends on what you're doing. But there is a process for special event permits. There is a process for tying it to a permit that's going through building, there is in some cases an administrative use permit is tied to that also, and your temporary use is or your temporary building is tied to that admin use permit. It just depends on the magnitude of what the topic is and how it's been addressed in code. But we really didn't touch that. What's there is what's there for those. And temporary uses or temporary signs or temporary.
Thank you very much. It's a lot of work, and I appreciate that. Good job.
Yeah, this is TJ Clausen. I think I have two questions specifically. And as Chair Shaka said, my first one may not be, it may be out of my purview, but as it relates to the categories, the use categories, I don't see any mention of live work. And as it relates to the heritage area, it's a question that I have a lot of developers oftentimes bring up. Where would live work, what category would that fall under? And has it been considered to potentially add that category?
We did have a category that it did fall under, and we did remove that category about 2 years ago. If you were to look at the code as it is today, because live work can be addressed in a couple different ways. You could have an apartment loft living above, and you could have offices on the first floor or second floor or wherever, and that person could have rights to lease both in conjunction, and that could, as a live work unit within the code. Then you could also have a live work unit where we've had some come in where the multifamily is directly connected to the work unit on the ground floor, and that first floor is limited to only office or only this or only that. It's restricted, and then you have the link to up above. Once again, it's a form of loft. So really, loft living is permitted in the Heritage Village, is permitted in most of our commercial districts and in a number of our office districts, and even I want a business park, but I'd have to double check that. And I could go to their chart right here and check that. And so there is ways to do it that way. Then there's a horizontal live work where the multifamily is next door, and that you have your business offices directly adjacent, and that in some way there is a component of your lease that links the two together. We have a number of different users who want to do live work where instead of a living room, they offer an office, and here's your kitchen, and here's your bedroom, and your living room's your office.
Mm-hmm.
That's not live work. That is a home occupation, which home occupation is an allowed use in most zoning districts. And if you want to do a home occupation, you've got to meet the home occupation portion of the code and the rules and regulations that go with that. Now, what some people don't like about that, you don't get signs. So you can't put a sign shingle up on the front of your apartment that says, hey, I'm here, I'm a real estate agent or whatever it may be, a photographer or whatever, because you don't get signage for multifamily like that, where there's been discussion about amending the sign code to potentially allow for some of that kind of thing, but we've yet to see a true live work environment come back. We had one that was approved and had permit and was ready to go, and then they lost their funding in 2009. And it never came back again. And that was really our first one. And it had parking on the street in front of it. So, and that was signed. So that was specifically for the uses that were on the street front. They had signage on the building and everything, but that never came to fruition. And then that portion of the code got rescinded. And in loft living is permitted in community commercial, shopping center, general commercial, regional commercial, heritage village, general office, business park, and Gateway Village Center and Gateway Business Center. So there's a number of different uses in town that allow the loft living.
Perfect, thank you. And then second question, there's reference to the removal of storefront access and transparency as a change.
That was put over in the design guidelines that were recently approved.
Okay, perfect.
What we found was as buildings were taller, they needed, imagine this, larger foundations. And so the columns coming down, in some cases, depending on the type of construction that was being proposed, were fairly hefty, but yet they were doing all these open windows, and it was really, they had a patio out front and they had roll-up doors, but it still wasn't meeting the 75%. It was like 68%, 62%. But yet, if you looked at it, you would say, Yeah, it's transparent, it's open, I can see through, which is the intent. But that's not the number. And so you hate to have somebody have to go through a zoning to amend that number when the building was perfectly fine. So the idea here was put it in the design guidelines to allow for a little flexibility. The goal is still 75%, but if you're at 71.8, you've got all the windows and all the patios and it looks great, then you've got it. So it was just to allow for a little bit of flexibility. And so it's 75% on commercial retail establishments. And in residential, we took it down to 50% because there's certain privacy issues with that. You still have windows on the front of your building, but not as expansive as you would on a commercial.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all I have.
And if I could, Mr. Chair, I would just like to sum up one thing here I forgot to mention is that as I got the feedback, if it's a comment about a pickup for a typo, or I forgot a word, or there's a graphic that needs amended, or there's something in direct context to the change that was made, and it's an easy minor pickup, I will pick it up and I will document it. If it is not as minor, but it is directly related to a change that was made, it will be brought back for discussion and talked about. If it is something that is unrelated to things that were changed within the LDC refresh that someone still feels is very important, then we will put it in a new parking lot and that will be addressed in the future. But I wanted to set expectations for how some of the items would be addressed. So thank you.
Perfect. If there's no more questions from commissioners, we do have two that I know of, public comments that we cannot respond to, but we welcome those comments because it really helps us as commissioners to serve and take into consideration folks that, you know, probably have a different point of view sometimes than we do, which is very helpful for us. So any other questions from commissioners? If none, I will turn over to Amy to ask for the public to comment.
Certainly. Dorlise Liddell, would you like to step forward and provide comment? Do you need a map or any graphic up, or should I close? Okay. That is not in my PowerPoint. I don't know if I can get that up to share fast enough. So, sorry, I didn't.
That's okay. They probably have it.
Okay. And I'm gonna close the PowerPoint so that they can see you instead. Or you want me to leave it open? Okay. I should be done.
Good evening. My name's Dorlise Machado Liddell. I am a Gilbert resident. I have multiple residential properties in the Heritage District. And unfortunately, the reason why I would come before you during the public comment was so that I can put that in your mind. So if you did have questions regarding this, that you would be able to answer the question. So hopefully this will be your thought process, because it is very, very discouraging that the public really doesn't have as much input. But I'd like to thank Amy Timms for all the hard work and dedication. I attended many of the meetings that they had, so I'm familiar with the background. What you're not familiar with is the whole process of the design guidelines that we just went through. So some of the things that I'm going to speak about were discussed at the design guidelines, where I feel that a lot of my private property rights were taken away. However, I would like to address the LDC draft. And in that, it's SF6. I own property in SF6. That's the residential area. You don't hear about the residential areas much, but it's been there for 100 years. And in my neighborhood, there are properties with 2 houses on one lot. There are multiple, there are duplexes, there are fourplexes, there is apartments, there is a multifamily apartment, there is single family, there is a multiple of different variety. What the town is wanting is one size fits all. That is very difficult to obtain in the redevelopment process. I hear a lot about the commercial. We want to have all the flexibility. We want to change it so the developers come in. But we never hear about what we can do for the residential area. And in that, I say, one of my questions is, can I and will I be able to split my lot if it's 6,000 square feet and if there's 3,000 minimum, will I be able to split my lot into two 3,000 square foot lots? In addition to that, the maximum height by right is 36 feet, 3 stories by right. The design guidelines that were just approved said 1 to 2 story is encouraged. They never said we're taking away the 3rd story. But what I hear in the downtown is we want to build up. We want to go higher than 55 feet so we can have rooftop, whatever. But I don't hear anything about the residential area and the property rights of the residents. My other question is, with the new guidelines, are you now requiring a garage, or is a carport still acceptable? Moving on to the accessory structure. I am one of a person who not only paid for a variance and a very expensive process to build a secondary dwelling. And that secondary dwelling is built that I would be able to rent that out to whomever I choose. Now the new regulation that's proposed is saying that now I have to live in my primary residence to be able to rent out my secondary, which I paid impact fees and thousands of dollars to build in this redevelopment process. So now, if I move out of that house, I no longer will be able to rent both houses that I paid for through the whole process. I was not the one or the people who changed it. I went through the process, I did it by the regulation, and I paid for it. So my question now, that will be taken away. In addition to that, we say, well, it's a great thing that you can build an ADU now. And if you have a 5,000 foot lot, or excuse me, living space, oh, it's great. You can build 2,500 square feet. All right, let's go back to Lacey Track, Heritage District, where we're talking about a residential area. Most houses are about 900 square feet, right? Your lot size is 3,000 is 65-ish, 100. So that person who has the 900 square foot, and let's say one of my houses, reality sets in, is 604 feet. Now, what do I have? My choice is to build a 300 square foot accessory structure. Who's going to live in that? What have you done? You will limit my ability to build. My property rights are now being taken away one step at a time, a little bit here, a little bit there. So we don't think about how it's going to impact the residential property owners. And I will tell you, it is a great impact, the great investment. So that's one of the things that needs to change, because the secondary structure was what I paid for. So in addition to that, what that is doing, if you have to live in your primary structure, you cannot rent the secondary or accessory. Well, I have property, I have rentals. That's what I do. Now you're limiting my ability. Now what you're doing is saying, well, we don't like that because some other property owners, they're doing some terrible things. So now I'm blamed for it. And so what it does, it changes the value, it changes the property rights. And I think that what you really have to think about is how these things are affecting people. And in the Heritage District, it is affecting people greatly because we have a unique situation. It's not like everywhere else. But I will tell you, to continually take away the rights is not the right thing to do, and it's not in the guides of redevelopment. And you want people to redevelop and be in partnership, but when you slowly take away those rights, it really affects it. So what I ask of you is to look at that and take it very, very seriously as though it's your property, that you've put your life savings in, and then somebody to come along and decide they don't like it and they don't want it. Because I will tell you, 3 stories, well, maybe I want a rooftop patio, right? You're going to hear people come to you downtown. They're going to say, I want a rooftop bar. Oh, well, okay. Well, if you're not allowing me to do what I want to do, I don't understand why it's acceptable for the commercial developers to do also. We need to start considering fairness and equity. And that's all I'm saying. And I appreciate your time. And I hope you listen to my concerns.
We appreciate your involvement. It's important to get involved in the public process. So thank you for your time tonight. Thank you. And I've taken a lot of notes. I think we have an additional speaker as well, Ms. Thames.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Mary Ellen Fresquez would like to speak next. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me? So my name is Mary Ellen Fresquez. I'm a resident of Gilbert. So I have 2 comments tonight. One of them was recognized by Amy tonight, and it was actually brought to my attention by Doralise yesterday. And that was that there was an error in the land development code that we're looking at tonight, the refresh. And the error was that the Heritage District would be one of the vertical height overlays that by right, a property owner would be able to build to 90 feet, 6 stories, and more if approved by council. And so I have to say that I'm really appreciative of the fact that Doralise found this, because it's not a small error. It's an egregious error. I'm not saying it was done purposely. I'm sure that it wasn't. This morning, I happened to be meeting with one of our councilmen, and I mentioned this. He was taking notes. I said, you don't have to take notes because it's being taken care of by Sydney and Amy. But he was saying if it were left in the land development code, it was overlooked, but somebody brought paperwork for a project, that project would go forward. By right, a property owner would have 90 feet. So anyway, I'm glad that it was caught, but I'm saying you as appointed officials and our council as elected officials have a huge job. I spend a lot of time looking at documents. I look at the redevelopment plan and I look at the design guidelines. I was a redevelopment commissioner for a long time. So I've studied them. I'm concerned about a project that's going to go into our downtown. You know, I take copious notes. I've got files of stuff. I have FOIA information. I almost feel like it's my second job. I think that it is Doralise's second job, but I mean, it takes a lot of time. And so all I'm saying is, as appointed officials, I hope that you are looking at the documents and re-looking at them so that we don't have an error such as that. And I know that staff is doing that. Staff probably has additional lawyers and who knows, everybody's looking at it. Even so, that was a pretty serious error. So that's one comment that I had. I hope that everybody takes the oversight of all of these documents and changes seriously. The second one that I have came up just as a result of an answer that was just brought up by one of you commissioners, and that's trees on step backs. So like I said, I'm concerned about a project that's going into our downtown where staff has requested 20-foot trees on step backs for a potential 4-story building. And the planning commissioners brought this up. How is that safe? When you look at the haboobs and the monsoons that we've had recently, you could probably weld the box that the tree is in so that the planter doesn't go flying off. Those trees are going to snap off or they're going to become uprooted. I know just driving over here, all of the uprooted and broken trees, that's a huge danger to pedestrians and anybody else. It doesn't just have to be a pedestrian, it could be a motorist. So anyway, my two comments. One is there's a lot to look at, and I hope everybody's looking at it. And secondly, I don't really know how trees are going to work, but thank you.
We really appreciate your comments and your diligence and your reading, and thank you for your attendance as well. Are there any more comments from the public that we have tonight?
Chairman Chaka, no other comments from the public.
So again, thank you, Amy, Thames, and Cindy. You guys are rock stars. You guys work, I don't know how many crazy hours preparing all this. You've mentioned prior, so thank you for your hard work on this, and we appreciate your time doing all the due diligence that you guys do, working hard. With that, we'll go into communications. I don't have anything to report. We've already introduced our new commissioner, so welcome aboard again, Mr. Clausen. Great to have you. Do we have any council liaison? Do we have our council member in-house and any messages or comments or reports from her?
Chairman Chaka, thank you. And Council Liaison Kathy Tilke is not in attendance this evening.
So hearing none, how about the other commissioners? Any reports from the other commissioners? None. And from our staff liaison, either Mr. Henderson or I think you're kind of doing all the work today as far as that goes. Do you have anything that you'd like to say?
Thank you, Chairman Chaka. I have two items for report from the staff liaison perspective. First and foremost, the survey for the design of the Paseo closed on July 16th, and we received more than 900 responses. It's a fantastic response, and we're delighted with the public comments and the feedback that we've received. The next public meeting to provide input will be in the fall of this year. And then the second comment, I wanted to update the commission on the fact that an RFP, request for proposal, for the South Anchor site. That site is located on the northwest corner of Gilbert and Elliott. It's a 2.18 acre site. That RFP was released on July 13th and will close on October 11th. You can bet that throughout that process, staff will continue to keep this commission updated and informed. At this point, Chairman Chaka, I have no other items to report on.
Perfect. Again, thank you for everyone's attendance. And I look forward to seeing you guys next month in person. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. It is 7:14 local time. Thanks again, guys. Appreciate it.